My family thought it would be hilarious to abandon me in a state I'd never been to. Let's see if he can survive and make it back. They laughed as they drove off. I never returned. 15 years later, they tracked me down with 107 missed calls, but I was no longer the same person they left behind. That summer I turned 22 should have unfolded like all the others before it. Long hours earning a paycheck at my dad's hardware store, living under his roof because higher education was deemed impractical by financial institutions and my father himself, and enduring my role as the perpetual target for my golden child brother, Alan. We weren't destitute, not really, but family vacations to Disneyland were firmly outside our reality. So, when my father, Banks, declared we were embarking on a family road trip to Colorado for my uncle's wedding, a flicker of suspicion should have ignited within me. Something felt off. 3 days into that vehicular confinement, regret was a bitter taste in my mouth. I cursed myself for not fabricating an illness or urgent commitment to stay behind. My dad and Alan had settled into their favorite pastime, tag-teaming ways to make my existence miserable. My mother, Irene, would occasionally interject a feeble, "That's enough." But her protests lacked conviction, mere performances for an audience of none. It's crucial to understand my family dynamic. Banks wasn't your average father. He was the kind of man who'd roust you from sleep at 3 a.m. to berate you over a forgotten chore, who'd discard your possessions if they inconvenienced him, who had been drilling the word, worthless, into my psyche since I first understood language. Alan, ever the pragmatist, learned early, emulate Dad or end up like me. His choice was obvious. That particular morning found us pulling into a desolate rest area somewhere in Colorado. It was the definition of nowhere, miles of empty fields stretching towards distant mountains, punctuated only by a forlorn little bathroom building adorned with vending machines. I'd been trying to sleep in the back of our Suburban and desperately needed to stretch my cramped limbs and use the facilities. Dad and Alan were sharing some joke up front, their laughter grating, while Mom checked her reflection in the visor mirror. I recall my attire with perfect clarity, a faded Metallica t-shirt, jeans sporting a hole in one knee, and the perpetually beat-up Vans I'd owned for years. My phone remained plugged into the car charger, my wallet stayed put. Why would I need it? We were marooned in emptiness, and I was just making a quick pit stop. 10 minutes. That's the maximum time I spent inside that chilly, tiled bathroom, perhaps even less. When I emerged, squinting against the bright Colorado sun, the parking spot where our dark green Suburban had been was vacant. Gone. Initially, denial kicked in. Perhaps they'd moved the car, indulging in one of their typically cruel pranks. I circled the entire rest area, my steps quickening with rising panic. Nothing. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from your own blood. The wound it leaves is unlike any other. I waited, perched on the curb, for an hour, clinging to the desperate hope they were merely trying to scare me, that they'd reappear any moment. Other travelers came and went, casting curious glances my way. A trucker paused, asking if I was all right. I lied, mumbling something about waiting for my girlfriend in the restroom. He nodded, accepting the flimsy excuse, and drove off. As the second hour bled away, a chilling certainty settled in my gut. They weren't coming back. My first instinct was primal. Find a phone, call them, plead, bargain for them to retrieve me. But as I started towards a mother juggling 2 small children, a lifetime of humiliations flooded my mind. Every sneering remark, every instance they laughed at me, not with me, every joke that thinly veiled raw cruelty. I could almost hear their voices echoing in the empty air, Alan crowing, "Dude, I bet he's crying right now." My father's gruff dismissal, "He'll figure it out, if he's not as stupid as he looks." My mother's weak objection, utterly ineffective. In that moment, a different resolve hardened within me. I approached the mother, asked to borrow her phone, but dialed information, not home. I obtained the number for the nearest shelter in Grand Junction, roughly 40 miles away. Then, crafting a story about a family emergency requiring them to leave abruptly while promising someone would fetch me later, I asked if she could possibly drive me into town. She hesitated, but my harmless appearance must have reassured her, because she agreed. That first night at the shelter was a harsh immersion into a new reality. I possessed nothing but the clothes on my body, no identification, no money, no contacts beyond the family who had discarded me. The shelter manager, Dave, let me use their computer. My initial thought was to look up my uncle's address from the wedding invitation I'd glimpsed, reasoning I could intercept them at the ceremony. But staring at the screen, a different question surfaced. Why? Why pursue people who had literally abandoned me roadside for their amusement? Instead, I created a new, anonymous email address. I searched for resources on emergency ID replacement. I Googled cash-paying jobs. I began to formulate a plan. 2 days later, I was submerged in steaming water and soap suds, washing dishes at a small diner named Sonny's. The owner, Geraldine, was a woman in her 60s with streaks of purple in her gray hair and an impressive collection of tattoos. I'd simply walked in, explained my wallet had been stolen, and asked if she needed help. She assessed me with shrewd eyes and declared, "Dishwasher quit yesterday. You steal from me, you're dead. Start now." Reaching the absolute bottom paradoxically offered a strange kind of freedom. There was nowhere to go but up. For a week, I worked double shifts, slept on a shelter cot, and wore clothes from the donation bin. Dave guided me through the initial steps of replacing my ID, contacting vital records back home. With my first cash earnings, I bought a cheap pay-as-you-go phone from Walmart. 7 days after my abandonment, it rang, an unknown number. I answered. It was my mother, her voice trembling. Where was I? Was I okay? They'd been searching everywhere, she claimed. It was just a joke, she insisted. They'd only waited down the road for 20 minutes before returning to find me gone. I listened to the practiced panic, the hollow concern. In the background, I could faintly hear my father instructing her to tell me to stop being dramatic and get myself to Uncle Rick's wedding. I heard Alan laugh. Salvador? Are you there? Say something. We've been worried sick. The cold knot of fear in my stomach had dissolved, replaced by stark clarity. You wanted to see if I could make it on my own? My voice was steadier than it had ever been when speaking to them. So watch me. I ended the call. Then, methodically, I blocked her number, my father's, Alan's, every family number etched in my memory. The following day, I walked into a Verizon store and changed my number entirely. 27 missed calls registered before the old number went dead. I pictured their escalating frustration, then fury, as they realized their punching bag wasn't returning for another beating. A month later, I had my own place, a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. It perpetually smelled of fabric softener, but it was mine. At Sonny's, I'd been promoted to prep cook, and Geraldine was patiently teaching me the correct way to chop vegetables without sacrificing a finger. Occasionally, morbid curiosity led me to check the old email address my family knew. Messages accumulated, please from Mom. Please come home, we're sorry. Commands from Dad. This childish stunt needs to end now. Taunts from Alan. Dude, it was just a joke, stop being such a... I never replied. Not once. The taste of freedom, once experienced, makes returning to the cage unthinkable. I won't pretend the path was easy. Some nights, scrolling through Instagram, seeing snapshots of ordinary families radiating genuine affection, an ache would settle deep inside, a void no amount of self-sufficiency could entirely fill. Loneliness sometimes felt vast enough to swallow me whole, especially during holidays. But each morning, I'd wake in my humble, downy-scented apartment, head to my job where no one called me worthless, and continue constructing my life, brick by painstaking brick. 3 months after they left me stranded, I logged into that old email account one final time. A new message from my mother waited. Your grandmother is asking about you. Please just let us know you're alive. I closed the browser, deleted the account permanently, and later tossed the old SIM card into the dumpster behind Sonny's. That evening, Geraldine showed me the secrets to her renowned apple pie, remarking I had good hands for pastry. It was, I realized, the first sincere compliment I could recall receiving in years. I never looked back. Update 1. 5 years later, 5 years after that searing day at the Colorado rest stop, a familiar face popped up on my Facebook feed. Not because I was actively monitoring my family, though perhaps sometimes I was, but because Alan had been tagged in a local news article from back home. He'd earned himself a DUI after wrapping his car around a telephone pole. Miraculously, only the pole was injured. The newspaper used his high school football photo, young, smug, a stark contrast to the bloated, weary face in the accompanying mugshot. Karma, I reflected, operates on its own timeline but possesses an unerring sense of direction. By then, I had sculpted something resembling a stable life in Colorado. The cramped studio above the laundromat had yielded to a one-bedroom apartment boasting actual windows that didn't overlook dumpsters. My trajectory at Sonny's had continued upward, from dishwasher to line cook, and finally, to assistant manager. Geraldine remained the matriarch, ruling with an iron fist in a flour-dusted glove, but her demeanor towards me had softened, shifting from charity case to something akin to an odd, adopted nephew. My first significant purchase upon accumulating real savings was a decent laptop. Nothing extravagant, just functional enough to pursue online classes through the community college, business management, basic accounting, the very subjects banks derided as being for those incapable of real work. My days fell into a rhythm, mornings at Sunny's, afternoons immersed in coursework, evenings back on the clock. Life was a cycle of work, study, repeat. Let's be clear, the scars remained. Trust wasn't just an issue, it felt like a subscription service I was poised to cancel the moment anyone got too close. In 5 years, I'd cultivated precisely 2 friendships. My neighbor Doug, bassist for a gloriously terrible garage band, who occasionally gifted me homemade beer that tasted suspiciously of hoppy dishwater, and Geraldine herself, if a boss could also count as a friend. That changed when Kendra began her regular Tuesday and Thursday pilgrimage to Sunny's. Always the same order, Denver omelet, no tomatoes, extra coffee. Always the same seat at the counter, textbook propped open. Medical school, I'd later learn. She possessed an extraordinary ability to completely disconnect while studying, often pausing with her fork halfway to her mouth for minutes on end. I started timing these lapses. The record stood at 7 minutes, 23 seconds before she'd blink back to awareness, staring down at cold eggs. It took 4 months of me diligently refilling her coffee mug before she truly looked up and saw me. Her eyes widened slightly as she informed me my name tag was misspelled. It wasn't, but this peculiar observation became our running gag. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I'd don a tag with the deliberately incorrect spelling. Salvador, Salvator. She'd pointed out. I'd feigned surprise. It was arguably the most awkward flirting in history, yet somehow, it worked. Our first date wasn't planned. Her study group canceled on her last minute, leaving her with a coveted reservation at Antonio's, a notoriously difficult pizza place to get into. I happened to be wiping down the counter as she received the bad news. The next thing I knew, I was sitting opposite her, both of us acutely, awkwardly aware that this situation mirrored a date precisely. 6 months later, she moved into my apartment. A year after that, we upgraded to a slightly larger place together, still modest, just a 2-bedroom where the toilet didn't perpetually run and the neighbors refrained from practicing bass solos at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, through carefully maintained fake accounts, I kept sporadic tabs on my family. Banks's hardware store floundered after a Home Depot opened nearby. His increasingly bitter rants surfaced on community Facebook pages. Mom's social media transformed into a strange shrine to an idealized past, filled with throwback photos of a smiling family and posts about missing her boys, plural, a detail rich with irony, considering she only tagged Alan and never mentioned me, as if I'd been digitally erased. Alan drifted between jobs, his updates vague pronouncements about haters and new opportunities, the classic online smokescreen for a life spiraling downward. 3 years into my Colorado life, during a routine inventory check, Geraldine pulled me aside. She confessed she was contemplating opening a second Sunny's location across town and inquired if I'd be interested in running it. Running, not owning, an important distinction. Sleep eluded me that night. My mind raced, convinced it was some elaborate test, a cruel joke. People like me didn't receive such opportunities. Banks had thoroughly ingrained that belief. The poison of his words lingered, a deep-seated doubt resistant to evidence. But I said yes. I said yes because Kendra, half asleep beside me, mumbled I'd be foolish not to. I said yes because Doug, enveloped in a haze of weed smoke, had responded with a blunt, "Duh, you practically run the original place already." Most importantly, I said yes because Geraldine wasn't Banks, wasn't my family, and had never once made me feel worthless. Sunny's East opened 6 months later. It was smaller, with a distinct menu, my menu. That first year demanded 90-hour workweeks. I shed 10 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, argued with Kendra about my constant absence, and occasionally found passive-aggressive post-it notes on the fridge. But it succeeded. Customers came, and more importantly, they returned. The food resonated, the atmosphere clicked. We weren't striking it rich, but we were building something sustainable. For years after my abandonment, I had saved enough to help Kendra make a significant dent in her monstrous medical school loans. She cried when I showed her the payment confirmation, not cinematic tears with perfect mascara, but genuine, messy, snotty, red-faced, hiccuping sobs. In that moment, witnessing her relief, I felt more authentically real, more grounded than ever before. Then, my grandmother died. I learned of her passing via Facebook, through Mom's lengthy, dramatic tribute laden with heart emojis. Grandma Rose. She had been the sole family member who dared to stand up to Banks, the only one who seemed to truly see me. She used to discreetly slip me $20 bills, urging me to save it for my escape. I'd always assumed she meant college. It turned out her advice was far more literal. The thought of attending the funeral flickered. I even researched flights. Kendra offered unwavering support, promising to hold my hand through the anticipated ordeal. Doug offered his beat-up hatchback for the drive. Geraldine simply shrugged, offering pragmatic wisdom. Dead people don't know if you're there or not. Do what brings you peace. I didn't go. Instead, I sent flowers, a generic sympathy arrangement. The card bore only my first name, Salvador. No return address, no additional note. Just my name. The online fallout was instantaneous. Mom posted about signs and reaching out from beyond. Alan dropped cryptic comments about prodigal sons. Banks remained publicly silent, but I could vividly imagine the tempest brewing behind their closed doors. A week later, a friend request appeared from an unfamiliar profile. Random name, no posts, no mutual friends. I nearly deleted it, but then I saw the message. It's Uncle Rick. Your mom gave me your old email, but it bounced back. Are you okay? We've been worried. Your dad has been asking around about you. I blocked the account immediately. That night, the past ambushed me. For the first time in 2 years, a panic attack seized me. I found myself crumpled on the cool tiles of our bathroom floor at 3 a.m., fighting for breath, desperate not to wake Kendra. My lungs felt like they were collapsing. Images of Banks hunting me down, appearing at Sunny's, shattering everything I'd meticulously built, flooded my mind. Kendra found me an hour later. She didn't pry, didn't push for explanations. She simply sat beside me, her shoulder a steadying presence against mine. When my breathing finally evened out, she offered the simplest, most profound reassurance. They can't take anything from you that you don't give them. The next morning, I consulted a lawyer about restraining orders, just as a precaution. I meticulously tightened privacy settings across all platforms and asked Geraldine to instruct staff never to divulge information about me. Practical steps. Control what you can control. 5 years to the day after being abandoned, I married Kendra. The ceremony was intimate, held in a state park beneath an open sky. Doug stood beside me as my best man. Geraldine baked the cake and wept throughout the vows, mascara tracing paths down her wrinkled cheeks. Kendra's large, boisterous family enveloped me instantly. Her father told dad jokes that miraculously didn't trigger a flinch response. Her mother hugged me without setting off internal alarms. Sometimes, I realized, family finds you precisely when you've stopped searching. A week after the wedding, late one night while scrolling through my dummy account, I saw it, a post from Banks on a community page, seeking information about his son Salvador. Last known location Grand Junction, Colorado, citing a family emergency. There was no emergency. I knew that instinctively. What remained unclear was the timing. Why now, after 5 years of silence? Driven by a need to understand, I delved deeper, creating another anonymous profile, infiltrating hometown community groups. Piece by painstaking piece, the picture emerged. The hardware store had shuttered, their house was in foreclosure, Mom alluded vaguely to health issues on social media, and Alan, post their DUI, had moved back home. They weren't searching out of love or regret. They were searching because they needed something. And in that moment, a surprising reaction surfaced. For the first time in 5 years, the thought of them brought a faint smile to my lips. Not from malice or satisfaction at their misfortune, but from a profound realization. I no longer cared. Their struggles, their desperation, it elicited pity perhaps, but not anger, not fear, not obligation. I closed the laptop, crawled into bed beside my sleeping wife, and made a quiet resolution. I would continue to observe, from a safe distance. Not fueled by hate, nor tethered by lingering love, but simply because sometimes, the most potent form of revenge isn't an action you take, but the life you build while others are consumed by their own self-destruction. Final update. 15 years later it began subtly, with a notification on LinkedIn, 15 years after that defining moment at the Colorado rest stop. The carefully constructed tranquility of my life experienced a tremor. Someone had viewed my profile 27 times in a single day. While not entirely unusual in the realm of recruiters and algorithms, the name attached to the views sent a jolt through me: Alan Matthew. My brother. The past, I was learning, possesses a patient, predatory stillness. It can wait in the tall grass for years before making its move. By then, my existence bore little resemblance to those initial, desperate years in Grand Junction. Kendra, having navigated the gauntlet of medical school and residency, worked part-time at a local clinic, allowing her more time at home with our children. We had two: Ellie, a bright 7-year-old, and Marcus, an energetic 4-year-old. The apartment above the laundromat was a distant memory, replaced by a modest 4-bedroom house on the town's edge. It wasn't luxurious, but it had a yard where the kids could roam and I could engage in mostly futile attempts at growing edible tomatoes. Sonny's had blossomed into a small, 3-location enterprise. It wasn't a sprawling franchise, but it generated enough success that I no longer needed to work the line daily, stepping in only during staffing emergencies. Geraldine had entered semi-retirement 2 years prior, though her retirement primarily consisted of showing up unannounced to critique our adherence to her sacrosanct pie crust recipe. I believed I had made peace with my history. The compulsive checking of family updates had dwindled to perhaps once every few months. The last I knew, Banks and Irene had downsized significantly after losing the house. Alan had cycled through another marriage and divorce. They all seemed to have forged ahead with their lives, just as I had with mine. The LinkedIn activity, however, unsettled me deeply. 15 years of absolute silence, now this digital reconnaissance. I mentioned it to Kendra during our Sunday night ritual, folding laundry while half engaging with whatever Netflix series we were currently trailing behind on. She paused, a mismatched sock clutched in each hand, her gaze searching mine. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to articulate the sudden resurgence of old anxieties, the feeling of being 22 again, stranded and helpless, Banks's voice echoing, worthless, in the recesses of my mind. 3 days later, I was at Sunny's East, the original expansion location, wrestling with inventory after our supplier mistakenly sent 3 cases of the wrong coffee filters. Maya, working the front counter, called back. "Sal, some family here asking for you?" My immediate thought was of Kendra's parents, who occasionally made surprise visits when passing through. Heading towards the entrance, my mind already calculating dinner possibilities, I prepared a welcoming smile. It wasn't Kendra's family. Banks stood there, visibly older, his hair thinner and grayer, his once imposing stature somehow diminished. Irene's face bore the pinched, weary lines etched by years of worry, her hair dyed an unnaturally uniform brown. And Alan. Alan looked startlingly like Banks had 20 years ago, the same proprietary stance, the same way of occupying space as if by right. A young woman I didn't recognize stood slightly behind them, perhaps in her early 20s, radiating uncertainty. Silence descended. The lunchtime clatter and chatter of the diner seemed to recede, leaving only the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs. Banks broke the tension first, uttering my name as if it were a question. I managed to nod, my voice having apparently deserted me. Over 15 years, I had rehearsed this confrontation countless times in my head. Some scenarios involved fiery, cathartic speeches, others featured cool, detached indifference. In a few embarrassing late-night fantasies, there were even tearful reconciliations. Reality, as always, proved far messier and less dramatic. I gestured towards an empty booth in the corner, asked Maya to bring waters, and sat down across from the individuals who had once constituted my entire world. I waited. Their story tumbled out. They'd located me through a magazine article. Rocky Mountain Rising, 10 local success stories. It wasn't even a prominent feature, just a sidebar with my photo outside the original Sunny's. But apparently, one of Mom's high school friends had relocated to Colorado, spotted it, and forwarded it to her with an inquisitive, "Isn't this your son?" message. 107 missed calls. That was the tally Mom had kept, the number of times they tried my old, disconnected number over the years. She presented this fact as if it held profound significance. They spoke over each other, Mom reiterating how worried they'd been, Banks insisting I'd misunderstood the events of that day 15 years ago, Alan awkwardly attempting to bridge the chasm with forced camaraderie. The young woman, introduced as Poppy, Alan's second wife, observed me with wide, curious eyes. I let them talk, observing the familiar patterns, the self-serving narrative they wove where their actions were minimized, their intentions benign. I noted Banks's eyes scanning the restaurant, undoubtedly performing a mental appraisal of its worth. I saw the slight tremor in Mom's hand as she reached for her water glass. I caught the practiced charms slipping from Alan's face whenever he thought my attention was elsewhere. When their explanations finally petered out, leaving a heavy silence, I posed the only question that truly mattered. Why now? Then, the unvarnished truth emerged, fragmented and halting, interspersed with awkward pauses. Banks was facing mounting medical bills, heart problems, no insurance. The second house, the downsized one, was now also facing foreclosure. Alan's latest entrepreneurial endeavor, something nebulous involving cryptocurrency, had imploded spectacularly. Mom required knee surgery she couldn't afford. They hadn't sought me out for reconciliation, they had come seeking a bailout. A wave of anger should have surged. I should have felt the righteous urge to expel them from the life I had painstakingly built. Instead, an unexpected emotion surfaced, pity. They looked so diminished, so desperate. These figures who had once loomed so large, wielding absolute power over my young world, were now just flawed, broken individuals grasping at straws. I invited them to dinner at my house that evening, stating I needed time to think, to discuss it with Kendra. They accepted readily, Banks already looking relieved, perhaps considering the matter settled. The afternoon passed in a haze of surreal normalcy. I picked Ellie up from dance class, helped Marcus assemble his components for preschool show and tell, all while relaying text updates to Kendra about our impending dinner guests. She offered to take the children to her sister's house. I declined. I wanted them present. I wanted my family to meet this family. Dinner was chicken enchiladas, a simple recipe I'd adapted over the years. Ellie set the table with earnest concentration, meticulously placing forks on the wrong side until Kendra gently corrected her. Marcus, declaring it Spider-Man Tuesday, insisted on wearing his full costume. When the doorbell rang, the casserole dish nearly slipped from my grasp. Kendra squeezed my arm as she walked past, whispering, "Got your back, no matter what." The children looked up, sensing the unusual tension. Moments you've dreaded, when they finally materialize, are often simultaneously worse and better than imagined. Introductions were strained. Banks repeatedly called Kendra Karen, despite gentle corrections. Irene dissolved into tears whenever she looked at the children, unsettling Marcus. Alan and Poppy made the most effort towards normalcy, though Alan peppered the conversation with unsubtle hints about family helping family. After the meal, Kendra steered the kids upstairs for baths and bedtime, giving me a look that clearly communicated, "Text if you need an extraction." Then, it was just the four of them and me, seated in a living room that suddenly felt suffocatingly small. Banks launched into his pitch, family sticks together, he'd always known I'd succeed, a blatant lie, they just needed a little help. A loan, $20,000, to get back on their feet. I let him finish his monologue. Then I asked him if he remembered what he'd said on my 18th birthday. He looked blank. I reminded him, "At least you can't disappoint me anymore once you're not legally my problem." I turned to Mom, asking if she recalled her response when Banks had thrown my community college acceptance letter in the trash. Silence. She had done nothing. I looked at Alan, asking if he remembered telling my first girlfriend I was probably gay anyway, when she'd come looking for me at the house. They shifted uncomfortably, offering mumbled excuses. Banks's voice began to acquire that familiar, dangerous edge that once made me physically shrink. But I wasn't shrinking anymore. 15 years and a universe of change separated me from that powerless young man. I excused myself, went to my office, and returned with a plain white envelope. I handed it to Banks. Inside was a check for $73.50. Banks stared at it, bewildered. "What the hell is this supposed to be?" he demanded. "In 2010, I stated calmly. "That was the exact price of a Greyhound bus ticket from Grand Junction, Colorado, back to our hometown. It's the precise amount it would have cost me to get home from where you left me." The silence that followed was absolute, thick with unspoken history. Then Banks erupted, shouting predictable accusations, ungrateful, selfish, always a disappointment. It was the greatest hits album of my childhood, playing one final, futile track. I didn't engage, didn't raise my voice. I simply stood up and informed them it was time to leave. Mom resorted to tears and guilt-tripping. "How could you do this to family?" Alan's mask of affable brother shattered, replaced by cold resentment. Poppy just looked acutely embarrassed by the entire scene. As they finally departed, Banks crumpling the check and hurling it onto our front step. I closed the door and leaned heavily against it, my legs suddenly unsteady. Kendra came downstairs quietly. "Okay?" she asked. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. We cleaned the dinner dishes together in silence, checked on the sleeping children, and went through the motions of preparing for bed as if it were any other Tuesday night. While setting the security alarm, I pulled up the feed from the front door camera on my phone. Their rental car was still parked in the driveway. They were arguing, Banks gesturing emphatically, Mom visibly crying, Alan staring intently at our house with an expression I knew intimately, a toxic blend of envy and hatred. Finally, they climbed into the car and drove away into the night. I have never seen or heard from them again. I don't expect I ever will. That chapter, finally irrevocably, is closed. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't a grand gesture or a confrontation. It's simply living well. Every shared laugh with my children, every inside joke with Kendra, every quiet Sunday morning free from fear, every single, beautifully ordinary day in a life I built on my own terms, that is the answer. I never made it back to the place I grew up. I did something far better. I built a home.